In the heart of ancient Rome, a woman walks naked through the streets, her body broken, her dignity stripped away. The crowd cheers not out of hatred but entertainment. This wasn't justice. It was theater. What you're about to hear isn't myth or exaggeration. It's the story Rome tried to erase, where power turned cruelty into performance and civilization revealed its darkest face. The theater of punishment. Beneath the marble heart of Rome, a scream broke through the morning air, raw, human, and unforgettable. It was the year 64 CE, and a woman stumbled barefoot through the cobblestone streets. Her naked body glistened with a mixture of blood and filth, chains dragged behind her, scraping against stone like a cruel rhythm of fate. Thousands watched in silence, not in horror but in fascination. For them, this was justice. For her, it was the end of dignity. Rome called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, but that name hides the truth. This was not simply execution. It was a ceremony of humiliation, a public play designed to strip a person of their soul before death. At the height of its empire, Rome prided itself on law, architecture, and civilization. They built roads that crossed continents, aqueducts that fed cities, and laws that shaped the modern world. But beneath that veneer of glory lay something far more sinister, a state that had turned cruelty into art. Every punishment was theater. Every drop of blood choreography, every scream part of the script. The woman being paraded that day could have been anyone, a slave, an adulteress, or perhaps someone who had simply refused a powerful man's command. The law mattered less than the message. Her punishment wasn't about what she did. It was about what she represented. Guards led her through the streets, forcing her to stop at certain places, outside temples she once prayed in, past her family's home, through the marketplace where she once smiled. The Romans had a genius for symbolism. They knew that to kill a person's memory was worse than killing their body. The crowd jeered. Some threw rotten fruit, others waste from nearby alleys. The poet Martial described such scenes centuries later. Women struck with stones mocked for their tears. When one tried to cover herself, her fingers were broken. When another fell, she was forced to rise again so the crowd could watch her humiliation continue. But the most haunting part was not the cruelty. It was the participation. Fathers brought their sons to learn the consequences of disobedience. Mothers whispered to their daughters, "Obey, or you'll end up like her." Children watched as laughter mixed with agony, and a society that saw itself as civilized applauded what it called justice. Even the woman's own family could not turn away. To refuse to attend was to invite suspicion. To show pity was to risk death. So they stood there, silent, eyes lowered, as their daughter was stripped of her humanity. The march was not random. Roman executioners had been trained in psychological warfare. They knew when to pause, how to turn a punishment into a memory that burned into the mind. Every moment was designed to terrify, to control. The empire understood that the sight of one destroyed woman could keep 10,000 others obedient. By the time she reached the Colosseum gates, her feet were torn, her voice gone, her spirit shattered. Behind those gates, the noise of the arena thundered like a living monster. 50,000 Romans shouting for blood, waving for the next act of the day. But this was no ordinary death. The crowd didn't come merely to see her executed. They came to see her unmade, to watch the empire's power manifest not through battle but through humiliation. The Romans believed that to dominate another person's body was to dominate their soul. This wasn't punishment. It was performance. And like every Roman spectacle, it had a script, actors, and an audience addicted to suffering. As the guards dragged her inside, sunlight spilled across the sand, golden, deceptive, beautiful. The scent of iron and sweat filled the air. Somewhere, lions growled in their cages, drums began to pound. The show was about to begin. For a brief moment, the woman turned toward the crowd, eyes hollow, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. She knew there would be no mercy. Her life had already ended the moment the chains touched her wrists. And yet in that fleeting glance there was something Rome feared most: defiance. A spark that refused to die even in the face of death. That's why they paraded her. That's why they broke her. Because Rome understood something terrible. Fear lasts longer than life. The gates closed behind her with a crash that silenced even the crowd. Inside, the empire's most depraved ritual was about to unfold. where death became theater and pain became art. But this was only the first act. What awaited her in the arena would make everything before it seemed merciful. The arena of shadows, the gates of the Colosseum creaked open, and the roar of 50,000 voices crashed like thunder. The woman staggered into the blinding sunlight, her wrists raw from chains, her breath shallow with terror. Before her stretched a circle of golden sand, flawless, endless, and merciless. The arena floor gleamed beneath the burning Roman sun like a stage built for the gods. But here, no god would show mercy. Above her, nobles reclined beneath silk canopies, fanning themselves with peacock feathers. Senators, generals, and priests sat shoulder to shoulder, united by one common appetite, blood. To them, this was not cruelty. It was culture, a reminder of Rome's strength, its order, its control. Every scream that echoed through these walls was an offering to the empire's idea of civilization. The announcer's voice rose above the crowd, naming her crime. Adultery, blasphemy, treason, or perhaps nothing at all. In truth, most didn't care what she'd done. The crowd came not for justice, but for spectacle. The drums began again, slow, rhythmic, echoing through the arches like a heartbeat of doom. Then came the smell, sweat, dust, and something darker, iron. The metallic scent of blood that lingered in the sand from countless bodies before her. A soldier appeared, holding a spear gilded in bronze. He motioned her forward. Behind him, cages rattled, deep growls shaking the ground. Lions, starved for days, paced restlessly, their golden eyes reflecting the sunlight like molten coins. The Romans called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. It was one of their favorite forms of execution. Criminals, slaves, and even Christians were thrown to wild animals not for punishment, but for entertainment. Historians wrote that emperors timed these events with perfection. The execution wasn't a chaotic slaughter, it was art. When the crowd grew restless, a victim was brought out. When boredom crept in, a new horror was unveiled. Rome didn't just kill its enemies, it choreographed their suffering. As the guards chained her to a post in the center, the noise dimmed to a hush. Somewhere in the emperor's box, a thumb hovered in the air. The crowd waited, breathless, eager. And then, with one swift motion, the thumb dropped. The gate opened. A lion leapt into the arena, muscles rippling beneath its golden fur, its roar shaking the stone beneath their feet. The woman didn't scream, not yet. She couldn't. Her breath had already left her body. She just stared, frozen, at the embodiment of Roman power rushing toward her. The beast circled her once, twice, as if tasting the fear in the air. Then it lunged, claws slashing, jaws snapping, the crowd erupting in applause. Blood splattered across the sand like red ink on parchment. But even in that frenzy, the Romans demanded control. When the lion pinned her, a handler cracked a whip, pulling it back. The execution had to last. The death had to be slow. The screams had to echo. Seneca, the philosopher, once wrote, "We kill men as a form of sport. We call it justice, but it is madness dressed in ceremony." Yet the people did not listen. The arena wasn't just for punishment, it was propaganda. It reminded Rome's citizens that power was absolute, mercy was weakness, and obedience was survival. The emperor watched from his marble throne, sipping wine as the crowd chanted his name. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away, because to rule Rome one had to love the spectacle, or at least pretend to. Minutes passed like hours. The woman's body grew still, but her story wasn't over. The announcer stepped forward again, ordering the next act, a mythological reenactment. Her remains would play the role of a goddess's punishment. Perhaps Dirce, tied to a bull's horns, or Pasiphae, condemned for forbidden love. The Romans didn't just execute. They performed legends through suffering. Actors dressed as gods would enter, pretending to avenge the sins of mortals. The blood on the sand wasn't just punishment, it was symbolism. Every death reminded the people that Rome's order mirrored divine justice, and the emperor stood as the mortal reflection of Jupiter himself. The beast was led away. Her body, lifeless and broken, was bound to a wooden frame. Pain had become a story. Suffering had become scripture. The crowd cheered. Flowers were thrown. Music played. And in that haunting contrast, wind between beauty and horror, between applause and agony, lay the heart of Rome's cruelty. When it ended, Slaves rushed to sweep the arena clean, erasing the evidence before the next act began. In minutes, the sand was fresh again. The stage reset, the cycle ready to continue. Because in Rome, death was not an ending. It was an entertainment industry. A system so vast, so methodical, that even morality bowed before spectacle. As the sun began to set behind the towering arches, the light turned crimson, not from fire, but from reflection. The Colosseum stood like a colossal tombstone for the souls devoured inside it. And as the crowd dispersed, one question lingered in the hot Roman air. How could a society that built the greatest empire in the world also perfect the art of cruelty? The empire of fear. When the crowds left the Colosseum, the city fell into silence. The same people who had screamed for blood only hours before now walked home with their children, their sandals crunching softly over the dust of broken bones. The laughter faded, the drums ceased, but the echo of what they had witnessed stayed, not only in the sand, but in the soul of Rome itself. Somewhere deep beneath the arena, slaves dragged the torn remains through dark tunnels slick with blood and water. Torches flickered against the walls, revealing centuries of stains, red shadows that would never truly fade. Each execution left a mark not just on the victims, but on the civilization that demanded them. Rome had mastered the art of killing, and in doing so had begun killing something inside itself. To outsiders, the Colosseum was a marvel, an architectural triumph, the heartbeat of imperial power. But to those who worked beneath it, the handlers, the slaves, the gravediggers, it was a grave that never stopped feeding. By day it devoured bodies. By night it devoured silence. The empire believed fear was the strongest foundation, and they were right. No army could conquer Rome as effectively as Rome's own spectacles could conquer the mind. Every citizen who had watched an execution left with the same unspoken lesson: obey, conform, never resist. Because in Rome, mercy was weakness and pity was treason. In time, these performances became ritualized. They were no longer about the condemned. They were about the spectators, about control, about the illusion that Rome could decide who deserved to live and who did not. Even emperors used executions as mirrors of their reign. Nero, dressed in silk, watched prisoners burned alive to light his gardens. Commodus fought in the arena himself, pretending to be Hercules, striking down unarmed slaves while crowds cheered. Each act was both theater and threat, a reminder that the emperor was God and the people were subjects bound by spectacle. The poet Juvenal once asked, "What remains to the people of Rome?" Bread and circuses, and he was right. The state fed its citizens food for the stomach and horror for the heart. It was enough to keep them quiet, loyal, afraid. But even the empire that ruled the known world could not control what fear left behind. For centuries after, travelers would write of hearing whispers near the Colosseum, a woman's voice faint but relentless, calling out from the dust. The Romans believed ghosts lingered where justice had failed, and there was no greater injustice than the games. When Christianity spread through the empire, the Colosseum's sand turned from theater to tomb. Here believers were torn apart for their faith, singing hymns even as lions closed in. The empire tried to silence them with spectacle, but their deaths did the opposite. They turned Rome's weapon of fear into a symbol of defiance. Their blood became its own kind of rebellion, a quiet, unstoppable protest against cruelty disguised as law. Over time, the empire began to crumble under its own weight. The roads cracked. The gold faded. The arenas fell silent, but the memory of its cruelty did not die. It lived on in the stories and the nightmares, in the moral shadow cast by a civilization that believed control was worth any price. Centuries later, when the Colosseum became a ruin, wildflowers began to grow in the cracks between its stones. The sand that once drank blood now nurtured life. Pilgrims visited in silence where once the crowd had screamed. The ghosts of the condemned, the slaves, the prisoners, the nameless women seemed to watch from the walls, their suffering finally given the only thing Rome never offered them: peace. Yet the question still lingers. Even now, beneath the arches, how can beauty and barbarity live in the same stone? How can the civilization that built libraries, aqueducts, and laws also perfect the art of execution? The truth is unsettling. Rome's greatness was never separate from its cruelty. It was built upon it. The same discipline that created order also demanded obedience. The same sense of glory that built empires also justified horror. And maybe that's why the ruins still stand. Not to glorify what Rome achieved, but to remind us what it cost. As the evening sun bleeds over the Colosseum's crumbling arches, the shadows grow long and silent. You can almost hear the faint rhythm of ancient drums, the echo of a crowd that once called cruelty justice. And somewhere in that echo, the empire still breathes, a whisper through time, asking us the question history never answered.